thank you so much for being here. I've been waiting to unleash Optimal Mindset, which is a mindfulness education program that helps individuals create kind of a personal buffer zone to diminish their own stress and ease communication between the individual and their coworkers and family and the rest of the world in general. But I'm going to tell you what mindfulness is, where it came from, how Optimal Mindset fits into that, and of course, why you want it. So it seems only fair to let you know how I got to be standing up here. My first career was as a marketing and sales consultant for both Control Data and IBM. I had a great time with IBM on Wall Street in Manhattan and then in Orlando, Florida as part of the AT&T National Account Team. My second career has been as a mind-body educator, most recently with Live Long and Love It as a private yoga therapist. And the screws in the middle don't mean I'm crazy. They actually refer to these screws right here. These ones happen to have come out of my right ankle, but they're a reminder that 27 years ago this month, I had a near-death car accident on black ice, and I broke both of my ankles in half. Feet dangling and parts missing, and oddly enough, the first thought when I was laying on the ground was, oh, thank God I don't have to meet with my marketing manager about my annual plan. So I do know a little something about stress. But essentially, at the end of all of that, they took out the plates and screws, and they took bone from my hips and packed it around my joints, so my ankle joints are surgically fused. So essentially, I've had a really wonky body for like 27 years, and the silver lining in that is that I've been forced to really learn to pay attention to what's going on with my body and my brain. So they say that mindfulness is caught and not taught, and so watch out, you might catch it from me. I love this stuff. I'm very passionate about it because I use it and live it. So what is mindfulness? Mindfulness in any form has two common components. The first is training the attention, and the second is expanding awareness. The roots for mindfulness come from contemplative religion, and the training the attention part, if you think about chanting a rosary or walking a labyrinth or reciting a mantra or even singing a religious hymn, all of those are ways to train the attention, and the purpose behind that is to turn down the volume on the gerbil wheel. And the gerbil wheel of the frontal cortex has one purpose, and that is to try and figure out what happened before, what might happen next, and how what's going on now might compare to that. It's a busy thing. I'm very familiar with the gerbil wheel, so training the attention is a way to kind of turn down the gerbil wheel. The second piece of any mindfulness program is awareness, and it's having the understanding that what's going on right here and right now is only part of a much bigger picture. Roots of mindfulness have been adapted in the modern community in lots of different ways. Mindfulness-based stress reduction is a clinical application of mindfulness. Cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavior therapy are mental health programs that use mindfulness. And then iRest, which is integrative restoration, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later. Mindfulness is kind of in. I don't know if you've seen it, this was a Newsweek from just 2 weeks ago that was all about the brain and how the brain works. Buddha's brain, the enlightened brain, it's kind of everywhere, and you might be wondering why. Part of that has to do with the fact that neuroscience as an area of study is relatively new. It's about 10 years old, and we have learned double. We know twice as much in the last 5 years as we did before. So it's one of these curves. And part of that has to do with the technology curve. We have equipment now like the functional MRI that can actually see what's going on inside the brain when a particular thought is occurring. And you can see what changes in the brain in terms of the composition when you train the attention and expand awareness. So all of that technical research has led to clinical studies that prove that all the stuff that some of us yoga folks have known for a long time isn't just woo-woo. It actually does work, and there's a science behind it. And so the application of mindfulness is showing up in all sorts of places with more frequency. Allopathic, alternative, mental health, and now more recently in the workplace. So who is playing in the workplace? The folks on top are actually people I'm excited to meet next month when I go to the Wisdom 2.0 conference in Silicon Valley. They're the high-tech kids, eBay, Google, Zynga, Facebook, Twitter, and they're kind of following a dude called Soren Gordhammer, who wrote a book called Wisdom 2.0, Ancient Secrets for the Creative and Constantly Connected. This is just the second time they've held the summit, and tickets have sold out like 6 months in advance both times. Those kids are the ones that have figured out that our 24/7 work environment is like working with a fire hose of information, and it's not always what you know, but how you're able to access what you know and work with other people effectively. The folks down below are other people that have mindfulness in more traditional lines of business, and it's certainly a partial list. It's an expanding list as we speak, and there's lots of different ways that mindfulness can show up in the workplace. It can be a mindfulness-based stress reduction program because there's a huge layoff and you're trying to facilitate the transition for those employees. It can be a mindfulness program that's part of an employee wellness offering. It can be an off-site retreat where you work on silent meditation and team building. So there's lots of different ways that mindfulness can show up in the workplace. So what in the heck is my mindfulness thing? What is this optimal mindset? So it's got 3 parts to it. The first part is a mindfulness protocol called Integrative Restoration. It's a particular tool that we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. And then information about why bother with mindfulness, why you might want to learn it, what the benefits are in your everyday life, and what changes in the brain when you do that. And then real-time support and accountability. Learning mindfulness is essentially learning a new habit, and so some support around that can be really helpful. So the benefits of a mindful practice around attention and awareness are pretty exciting. I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you're working on something and time just kind of flies and you're in the groove. A focused mind is a relaxed mind. So learning to train the attention and get away from that gerbil wheel is actually very relaxing to the brain. We also cultivate an attitude of curiosity about what's going on when we're paying attention, and that in itself is a great stress reducer. There's no judgment about it. It's just like, look at what my brain's doing now. Again, the awareness piece is the part that I love and live every day. It's paying attention to what's going on, particularly with your own self, physically. So knowing when your shoulders are up in your ears, or when you're like this and you're going to end up with a low back thing that ends up with a headache, that kind of a physical awareness. Energetic awareness, which has to do with whether or not you're wound up and overwhelmed. There's actually a curve called Benson's curve that talks about underwhelm and overwhelm, and right in the middle is just enough positive stress or eustress to get you in that zone. So if you have some level of awareness about where you are on that curve, you're better able to spend more time in that productive zone. And then emotional awareness is that piece where every time you see Jane walking down the hall, you get this feeling in your stomach. Or, when Bob shows up at a meeting, you just kind of want to wring his neck. So if you have some awareness about those emotional triggers, you have an opportunity to take life differently. Metacognition is the ability to think about thinking and to watch your thought patterns, which is quite revealing, so that you know whether or not you've got a self-defeating thought pattern or a negative thought pattern that's not serving you. And all of that awareness stuff is within that framework that allows you to understand you are not your sensations, you are not your emotions, you are not your thoughts. So what is iRest? iRest is a particular mindfulness protocol that was developed by Richard Miller, who has a PhD in clinical psychology. He is in San Rafael, California, and I met him 3 years ago at the Symposium for Yoga Therapy and Research. He did a presentation on his clinical work on post-traumatic stress disorder with returning vets out of Iraq and Iran. But he's also a longtime yogi. He was one of the founders of the International Association of Yoga Therapists. And what he's done is taken the Vedic model of the human body, which is based on the Vedas, which is an ancient Indian text, and that's the root of Ayurveda. And that views the body as a 5-layer entity. And so that's what the protocol is based on, those 5 koshas. And he's integrated that format with Western psychotherapeutic technique. Again, the clinical application for his work has shown up in places like the VA. There's a whole program called Warriors at Ease that's just for post-traumatic stress disorder for returning vets. He's also branched out and worked with violent offenders, homeless folks, people with depression, anxiety, and insomnia, those kinds of things. But for the rest of us, it's a really nice framework to be able to understand the stress-related symptoms that we're carrying around and our emotional triggers. And it gives you a framework for processing the stimulus that sets you off so that you can learn and make a different choice. So the specifics of iRest, if you've ever had any other mindfulness training, there's some things that are different about it. It's a 10-step framework, as I said, and I really like that structure. It's like you go from A and then you go to B and you carry right along. You're not left to free float and empty your mind, which has never really worked very well for me. It's an easy and accessible format, and once you learn those pieces, it's like learning the scales, and from there you can play the piano. And the playing the piano is integrating those tools of mindfulness into your everyday life. I love the fact that there's no religion attached to it, so that's nice. You don't have to get over that hump. And essentially what you're doing when you're working with those 5 layers is you're learning to shift your brain state. So you start out with an alpha brain wave, which is the brain state you're in when you're waking and out operating in the world. You learn to shift to a beta brain state, which is that place your brain goes when you're watching TV at the end of the day, right before you nod off, into a theta brain wave state, which is that place right between waking and sleeping. So you train your brain to progressively relax until you're in this deep state of relaxation, and that's where you have the opportunity to process emotions and belief systems and do some self-inquiry. I love the fact that it's deeply relaxing. Unlike some other forms of meditation, you actually get to lie down. If you're not into lying down, you can sit up in a chair, but the whole idea is to be very well supported for the whole process of relaxation, which is, I don't know, I have always had a hard time with sitting on the floor because of my ankles. I would end up sitting there thinking how uncomfortable I was, and I could never get to the meditation part. So being really well supported is a nice thing. It's also self-directed, so once you've learned those 5 tools, or those various components that correlate with the koshas, it's up to you to decide which ones you want to implement and how often. And it's your own personal inquiry. If you're not into processing deep emotions, fine. Maybe you take the first 2 tools and use those on a real regular basis for stress reduction, but then when there's a particular crisis that comes up, you have a place and a methodology for doing some self-inquiry. And it's structured yet flexible, which as an instructor I love. There's that same framework every time, but the way you implement the techniques within the framework changes, so it's not boring. It's the same, but it's never boring. We know what mindfulness kind of is now, and we know how the Optimal Mindset Toolkit fits in within that. What do you get out of it? The personal benefit of a mindfulness practice, as I said, is creating that buffer zone around yourself, so that you're less impacted by whatever the stimulus is that's coming at you, or the equipment that suddenly breaks down and you want to throw it out the window. It's also what I call a personal reset button. It's like you have the ability to learn how to self-calm. I myself love the afternoon reset button. It makes me a much nicer person for the latter half of the day if I have some quiet time to be able to kind of calm and reset my nervous system. That whole process of having that buffer creates what's called emotional resiliency, which is the ability to better ride the tide of life without shocking the nervous system with every little thing that comes up. And that in turn decreases your stress level, which, as we all know, stress is a major contributing factor to all the big expensive diseases like diabetes and coronary heart disease, excessive weight gain, and so you can really make an improvement in your physical health, but also in the little triggers that annoy us all with the migraines and the constant shoulder and neck tension and so on. And it's a self-empowering methodology. I like the fact that I can be in control of myself. I have a toolkit that I can use on myself. I don't need to go see my acupuncture. I don't need to go and get fixed up by somebody else. I can use it when I want to, in the way that I want to. You learn to control what's called the central nervous system. There's the sympathetic nervous system, which is when you're in fight or flight being chased by the tiger. There's a parasympathetic nervous system, which is in place when you're in a calm, restful state, and you actually learn to shift between those two. That's the reset button part in the afternoon. And you control it yourself. As I said, you're in charge of how much of the protocol you use and how you integrate it into your everyday life. We also talk about positive psychology, which is a concept that I find fascinating. So evolutionarily speaking, our brains aren't that old, and they're still wired in a very basic aversion and attraction modality. The aversion piece really helped the caveman when he was hiking through the woods because he needed to be on high alert in case a tiger showed up, because if he missed the tiger, he was out of the game. Well, that same aversion mentality is still operating on our brains and really doesn't serve us very well when we're in a business environment or trying to get a parking spot in the parking lot across the street. On the other side, and those aversion signals are close in. They're short-term, readily accessible. There's a really deep groove in terms of a neural pathway going to that aversion piece. The attraction piece is things like calm, contentment, and compassion. They're way back in storage in the back of the brain, which is why if somebody says, nice presentation, it takes a full 3 seconds for a positive compliment to actually soak in and be in a place where you can access it in short-term memory. So positive psychology has to do with self-directed neuroplasticity, which means that you can choose to kind of fill in the deep grooves that go to those negative thought patterns and dig deeper grooves into the positive thought patterns. Plasticity being that concept that the brain changes over time, it's not static. And then the opportunity for behavior change. So if you know what your emotional triggers are and you know what your self-limiting thoughts are, you have an opportunity to make a change. And that can be important in terms of work style. If you're not interacting in the workplace in a way that's serving you or that management is looking for. It can have a great benefit in terms of major life transition, be that a job loss or a divorce or a sudden illness. So if you're not looking at it from an individual perspective and you still want to know how mindfulness might be a benefit at the management level or you're responsible for other people, in the big picture, on the macro level, that improved awareness by your employee helps with their productivity because they're able to stay in the zone more often, be in the sweet spot more often, which means they get their work done more quickly and with fewer mistakes. There's also a sense of increased creativity and interpersonal communication. That means if I have the ability to get quiet, instead of listening to the gerbil wheel, I'll have better access to creative thinking and be able to think outside the box more often. In terms of interpersonal communication, I'm sure we've all been in the meeting where everybody shows up tired and grouchy, and they're super vested in whatever their piece of the puzzle is, and you spend hours hashing it out, and you come up with some sort of a compromise that then is taken out and executed and doesn't do very well. If you have people around a table that have some awareness of what their behavior is doing and how it's impacting the other people in the room, and some sense of compassion about the fact that that guy across the room is just as vested in his piece of the solution as I am, you actually come up with an easier team communication and business solution. And facilitation of change, this is something that I've talked with some consultants about relative to change management. So if you have a business, you can come in and bring the assessment tools that show where things aren't flowing right. You can rearrange the business process so that it's more effective. But if you don't deal with what happens to those people involved in that change, you're missing a big piece. Because when people's jobs change, they're worried that they're not going to have the same responsibility they had before. They're going to be given responsibility that they might not be able to handle, or worse of all, their job will go away altogether. So I think there's a real benefit in change management. On the micro level, happy people make better employees. They have a higher level of job satisfaction. They like the work they do. They like the people they work with. So they stick around longer, and they get sick less often. They take fewer sick days, and they don't get the big expensive diseases that cost so much. And those decreases in healthcare show up in lost days, replacement, retraining, and so on. We know what mindfulness is, we know what optimal mindset is, and we want to get it. So there are two ways to get it. You can get it as an individual or you can get it as a group. And if you get it as an individual, there are two ways that you can receive instruction. It's like having your own private mindfulness coach, and you can have that relationship be an interactive one, which is called a dyad, and that's when two people are dialoguing together throughout that process. And as an instructor, if that student is progressively dropping into a deeper level of relaxation and then able to verbalize what's going on, the transition and the change is just much more effective. The other way is to receive it as a passive instruction, which doesn't mean it's any less effective. It just means that you're maybe not as exposed. So that's the way you would work as an individual, those two ways. And the benefit of working as an individual is you can target the curriculum to address whatever goals or behavior changes that individual is interested in working on. Or you can receive instruction as a group, and you can do that either in a walking off the street kind of an open enrollment thing, or you can pull together your own group from your workplace, or I'm working with the staff of a religious school in a couple of months. It can be, faculty or staff from a library. Learning mindfulness is a little bit like learning to bench press. It's a progressive learning. If you get a one-shot deal, you'll be exposed to the tools, but you won't necessarily have the opportunity to change. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to give you exposure right now, right here. It's time. So first I'd like you to put your hands on top of your head. So having your hands on, don't give me that look, it's good for you. Putting your hands on top of your head inhibits what's called chest breathing. And chest breathing is a sign that the sympathetic nervous system is in charge. You're in fight or flight. Jerry knows this because I got him to breathe once. Chest breathing is a sign of stress, continued stress, or a chronic disease. So with your hands on top of your head, you can't breathe in that chest breathing so much, but you're forced into diaphragmatic breathing. So take a minute to feel your breath. Feel it in the lower part of your torso. And now take a long, deep inhalation. And as you exhale, think, oh, thank God, I don't have to try so hard. And take a couple more like that. That release of the exhalation is actually called the letdown response. And there's a physiological piece to that has to do with a slight slowing of the heart rate, slowing of the breath rate. And both full body breathing, which is breathing through the diaphragm, and the letdown response are part of what we talk about in the beginning of the optimal mindset training. Okay, you guys look great with your hands on your head, so you can take them off now. So I'm going to ask you to indulge me a little bit more here. I'd like you to close your eyes, put your feet on the floor, and place your hands on your lap. And again, take a nice, long, deep inhalation. And as you exhale, feel the body relax. And let that sense of relaxation release the tension on your brow. Soften the corners of your eyes. Let the jaw unhinge a little bit. And have the tongue spread wide in the bottom of your mouth. Feel that connection between the exhalation and the softening of the body. Imagining that the skin is actually softening and you're letting the stress slide off your skin and pool around the feet at the floor. As your body relaxes, you'll notice the weight in your hips gets a little bit heavier. So feel that heaviness, feel that groundedness in your chair. And then let your attention travel to your feet. Feel the feet grounded on the floor. Feel the base of the big toe, the base of the little toe, the inner heel, and the outer heel. Feeling from the inside those four corners of the feet as they ground into the floor. Then let your awareness slide up the legs to the pelvis, feeling the bowl-like shape of your pelvis seated in the chair. Belly soft as you breathe. And then let your awareness come up to the center of the chest. You might feel a slight rise and fall of the center of the chest. And then go ahead and let your eyes open. So that was like a little tiny taste of one tool in the optimal mindset training. And hopefully you were able to at least get a sense that you can, by connecting the mind and body, shift your internal state. Okay, so this is that exposure versus change thing. So this training can be done in a 1-hour overview, which would be a slightly extended version of what we're doing today. You get some information about why mindfulness is useful and how it works. You can do a 2-hour taster. In that session, you'll have an overview of that 10-step protocol and then actually have an experience of optimal mindset. Then my recommendation is the 8-week course. And this is what I call the full meal deal. Each week we address a different piece of the protocol and a different skill, and talk about how that impacts the brain and how that impacts your life outside of the classroom. You're given an on-the-job worksheet where you practice that skill during the week, and an audio download that you practice with at home. So every week you're accumulating, you're lifting those barbells. Lifting those barbells, because if you showed up in the 7th session and hadn't done any practice before, it's pretty intense. Your brain's not ready for that. It can't focus that long. And usually what happens is you fall asleep, which is nice. Your brain's still working underneath all that, but it's much more effective if you're able to stick with the program, if you will. And then a custom training of any kind for an off-site retreat or the beginning of a management conference or a board of directors meeting, whatever. Thank you so much for listening.